Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's panel discussion on the Capability Maturity Model Integration, Introduction to CMMI, Building Better Processes for Business Success. Can everyone see my slides?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, our agenda for today is we are going to be doing a CMMI overview. We are going to be providing what the business value is of CMMI. We're going to talk about some of the risks and the timelines, and we're going to share some implementation and some strategies on implementation, and also provide, how can companies get started, as well as share some best practices. And of course, we'll take your questions at the end. If you can drop them in the chat, that'd be great. All right, let's meet our panel. We are thrilled to have an esteemed panel of experts joining us to share their insights on how CMMI can drive process improvement and just enhance organizational performance and enable continuous growth in an ever-evolving business landscape. We have Dan Payne, our CMMI lead appraiser. We have David Krishek, a CMMI implementation specialist and management consultant. David is going to be our SEM perspective. And we have Patricia Eglin, our CMMI implementation specialist and management consultant. And Patricia is going to be our client company perspective. So thank you all for joining us today. And without further ado, let's get into the questions. All right, Dan, if we can start with you, can you tell us what CMMI is and just provide us a high-level overview?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. It is my honor and pleasure to be with you today. So what is CMMI? CMMI is a collection of best practices. And based on implementation within the company, whether you're large or small, depends on the size of the organization. These best practices will help you mitigate some of the issues delivering a quality product to your customer. It will help reduce the number of defects found in production and help you manage the project and deliver on time and under budget.
Okay. And why do you think, Dan, it's important for organizations?
So as I said, meeting the quality product for your customer is always very important, and also to maintain the budget. Companies which are have not implemented CMMI practices within the organization oftentimes are over budget and deliver poor quality products and have defects. So it's very important for companies to utilize the CMMI model.
Okay. And David, Patricia, do you have any thoughts on an insight on why it's important to organizations?
Patricia, go ahead.
I think, on top of what Dan said, it's important. It gives organizations a foundation. So just like if you were building a house, you need a solid foundation to be able to build that house and for that house to be able to grow. It's the same for an organization. You need to have that foundation of standard process, metrics, all the things that come from, implementing CMMI, so that you can not just build your processes and improve on them, but that you can build the organization on something that's solid.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that as well that for me, it's about consistency and repeatability. CMMI really helps an organization to build better processes, which leads to more consistent results, reduce costs, and really gives you that competitive edge that you need in the industry, whatever industry you're in.
Okay. Thank you guys for your insight. David, we'll keep with you here. Can you share with us how long CMMI has been around and how the process and framework has evolved?
Yeah, certainly. So CMMI has been around for a while, since the 80s, actually. It started off as the capability maturity model, and it was focused on software development and for software organizations. But it's really grown a lot since then. When CMMI came into play, it was designed to address more than just software. And now it's used across a ton of industries, manufacturing, services, even healthcare, and very much so in the defense industry. So over the years, it's adapted to be more flexible, more scalable, so organizations of all sizes and stripes can use it. It's really evolved from something that was intended more for big players to something that fits any company to looking to improve its processes and performance.
All right, thank you. Patricia, can you share what are some of the primary benefits of CMMI?
So you've heard us talk about cost and schedule advantages several times here already. And of course, those are critical to an organization. However, I think one of the other significant benefits is just having that cohesive understanding of projects and overall performance at various levels within the organization. Having those standard processes and that standard reporting gives that cohesive understanding because it facilitates communication across different levels of the organization. So in other words, it drives that business performance, and because everyone is either directly involved or informed of the process, it allows for timely course corrections rather than more of a post facto adjustment if something's not going as expected.
Okay, thank you. And this question is for all of you guys. What are the potential impacts if a company chooses not to implement CMMI? What are the risks?
Dan, do you want to go first?
All right, thank you. There are multiple risks, as we've said multiple times about cost, but let's talk about quality. Quality is always very important. Once you're delivering a product to your customer, you want to make sure that it has as few defects as possible. We all know that once a defect is found in production, the cost is quite substantial. So by utilizing the CMMI and introducing this into and implementing it within your company, you deliver a better quality. As David had said, the model originally started out with software development and has grown to multiple domains, services, people, security, etc. And so there are multiple ways in which different organizations can implement this to improve the quality that they're delivering to their customer.
Okay. David, Patricia, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll add in that if a company skips out on CMMI or some other process framework, they're basically leaving process improvement on the table. And if you're in a space where compliance is key to winning contracts, like in the defense industry or in healthcare, not having CMMI can actually hold you back from winning out on those contracts and meeting regulations. So yeah, it's definitely something that you want to consider if you want to stay competitive.
Yeah, I agree with what has already been said. And I think one of the other things too that's really important is that, there's that everything is then done ad hoc. So if something works really well, you have to try and remember what you did to replicate it. Where if something didn't go so well, and then the same type of thing, you need to understand why didn't it go well so that you're not repeating the same issues. And having those standard processes, and again, even that standard reporting really helps drive those things. It helps drive that process improvement and that consistency and their predictability across projects and across the project outcomes.
Okay. Great insight, everyone. Next question. Patricia, we can start with you. How long does it generally take to implement CMMI?
So I'm going to give you a true consultant answer it depends. So it really depends on the organization. And I see Dan and David laughing because it depends on what the organization has in place already. It depends on how much they've actually implemented it and how it's actually being followed. It depends on the culture of the organization and how quickly they are to adopt new processes or new ways of doing things. If you work at an organization where people have been around 20, 30 years, which nowadays is less common, but even 5 to 10 years, they say, well, this is how we've always done it. Even if it's broken, that's what they're used to. But typically going into a new client, again, depending on what they have, I'd say typically 8 months at an absolute minimum. Anywhere, it used to take up to 18 months, but I'd say it's closer now to 8 months to 12 months.
Okay. David or Dan, did you want to add anything to that?
So I'll just make a comparison that I've used in a lot of conversations over the years. A small company can be relatively aligned with CMMI and not even know it if they do good things in a good way and plan and have processes and procedures in place, just because they're best practices and they're called that for a reason. So some organizations will intuitively just get to a point where there's not a lot of work to do. I've made the comparison to Bob's lawn mowing company, where he starts off just going door to door mowing lawns, but as the company grows and he hires more people, he develops processes and procedures so that he knows how long it's going to take to mow a lawn, whether it's it has bushes or shrubs, or needs to be aerated, or has pest control that needs to be added. So that builds up the book of services that he provides. And then he hires other people to help him, and he knows how long it takes for them to do the different services. And suddenly, if he looked at a standard like CMMI and said, how does this compare to what I do? He may be 80% of the way there and just needs to do a little bit more work in order to check all of the boxes and be compliant with the standard, as opposed to a software company that's been doing business for 20 years, but they just take every new project as a opportunity to reinvent the wheel, and they've got a lot more to do to get compliant with the standard. So to go back to Patricia's first 2 words, it depends.
All right. Thank you for your insight. We're going to switch some gears here and go to Dan here. Dan, can you discuss the different maturity levels of CMMI and what they signify? And
Yes.
I'm going to share my screen here.
Good. Thank you very much. I have the same on a different monitor. So yes, there are 5 levels. So as David had mentioned, this unpredictable and reactive level 1, their process is not well defined or defined at all, and they're recreating everything multiple times for all of the new projects. Level 2 means that you're managed. You have projects that are in place, and those projects are following their own prescriptive documents in order to deliver to the customer. Once you move to level 3, now at the organization, you have templates that are available as new projects are being brought into the company, and it's well defined. You're following a standard. Then for level 4 and 5, those at level 4, you're measuring and controlling your process. And level 5, you're optimizing. You're looking back at the stability of your process and implementing new changes as appropriate. Most organizations always look for and are appraised at level 3. There are organizations appraised at level 2. The larger organizations, Raytheon, Teledyne Brown, Intergraph, etc., would go for level 4 or 5. But the majority of organizations try to achieve level 3. And as Patricia had mentioned, moving from one level to the next really depends on the organization itself. The Institute indicates that from level 2 to level 3 may take from 8, 12, 18 months. To go to level 5, that's going to take considerable more quantitative analysis in documentation and can take up to 24 months, moving from level 3 to level 5.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're going to switch gears another round here and focus a little bit on the strategy of it. And Patricia, this is a question from the client perspective. Who should consider adopting CMMI? And are there specific industries or company sizes that benefit most?
So again, we've talked about,
Yes.
process improvement. We've talked about cost savings and quality. And I love the fact that David brought up I think it was Bob's lawn mowing service, because it used to be that this really was used for larger organizations. It was used for software development organizations or organizations who only wanted to do work with the government. And I think as it's gone on and as new domains have been adopted or have been introduced, it's really beneficial for any organization, regardless of what you're doing, that really is just looking to improve their development or their service delivery. And I don't want to say it's less about the process, but it's really about, what is our business objective? What are we trying to improve? How can we use what we're doing to document it and repeat the delivery of high quality products or services, and how can we do it efficiently? So it's beneficial for any organization or any project that wants to solve a business challenge by building that capability and increasing their performance. I think is really the best answer. It can be used anywhere. It can be used by anybody, whether they're looking to actually go for a certain level, or whether they're just looking to improve and do better with their business challenges. As far as the industry and company size, I've worked with companies, that had anywhere from 5 employees up to 30,000 employees. And in multiple industries, I worked with an insurance company all the way out to aerospace and automotive. For larger companies, it really helps to promote that process standardization, that optimization. It increases efficiency and productivity, which again translates to cost savings and shorter time to market for products and services. But also for smaller companies, it gives that greater insight into what is currently happening within the business. So what are your current practices within the business, and using that to improve their delivery, customer satisfaction, as Dan said earlier, reducing defects, which is very costly if you don't catch them early enough. But all of that in turn for a small business can help them really grow and, really help them move into either a different market or into a different industry, because especially if they get or go through the appraisal, they've already passed this global scale vetting process about the quality, which speaks to the quality of their products and the repeatability of their ability to deliver. So again, it can help smaller businesses grow or even just be at the forefront of whatever industry they're in.
Great answer. Thank you so much, Patricia. This is a question for David. Can CMMI be integrated with Agile methodology? And if so, how can organizations balance both?
This is a great time to be answering that specific question, because version 2 of the CMMI up until the last year or so really focused on more traditional software development life cycles, and Agile was almost like an adjacent plugin into the model, because they would reference and Agile or Agile, and so there were these other references. But in version 3 of the CMMI, they really made some significant shifts into addressing Agile and how it really reflects the growing demand for flexibility and adaptability in process improvement. The new version of CMMI actively incorporates Agile principles throughout the entire model, and it focuses on this idea of continuous improvement, collaboration, customer-centric development, all of which are key tenets of Agile. And it still has all of the pertinent controls and requirements for traditional product development, services development. So you can have that more traditional approach. You can have the Agile specific approach. You can even create that hybrid approach where some projects go one direction and other projects might go another direction. So it really has the flexibility to address any approach to products or services. And so organizations really have the ability to kind of choose their own adventure.
Great to know. Thank you so much. And another question for David, just kind of for companies who want to get started. You have these small and medium enterprises. What is the best first step when preparing for CMMI?
Yeah, great question, and probably one of the hardest questions that small and medium-sized companies need to figure out. You don't know where you're going on the map until you know where you are on the map. So it really is about getting your own baseline. You need to figure out where your processes are. And that usually means doing at least a quick gap analysis to see what's working and what needs improvement. And once you have that focus on the basics, you can start with level 2 of the CMMI, which I think, Dan was kind of alluding to, that level 2, level 3, what's appropriate for you and your organization. Unless there are some contractual requirements that are forcing you to go to mature level 3 straight away, usually you start kind of with targeting that level 2, just build the gap, build some muscle memory around process improvement and consistency, get your documentation built, things like that. The key is to get leadership on board early, and that helps everyone to understand why it's worth the investment. Then you can start making other improvements that will kind of snowball over time. And this is a marathon, not a sprint. So you take it one step at a time, and you'll get there.
Great, thank you so much. Patricia, from the client perspective, as we talk about best practices, can you share some lessons learned from companies that are just getting started with CMMI?
I can. David had mentioned about senior management and their buy-in. And one thing that I've seen often actually is either insufficient or what I'll call incorrect senior management support. A lot of times organizations, they talk about the value of it. They want to move towards CMMI, but they see it as a task that's going to be completed in between somebody's real work, is what they'll say. And sometimes the process or the duty of documenting the process gets assigned to a junior resource, and they may have a lack of understanding of the organizational processes, or they don't possess enough authority or any level of authority to determine the optimal performance methods. So it's crucial not just to have the senior management buy-in, but also to have that buy-in from various levels within the organization, and to realize that this effort really requires dedicated time and shouldn't be treated as an afterthought. That's something that I see quite often, where again that level of senior management is not really as involved. They're just dictating it's going to happen without giving the proper thought or the proper level of support to getting it done. One of the other things, I think we talked about this, I think it might have been David that mentioned something along the lines as well about small, medium organizations and the level of process. So one of the other things that I've seen a bit over the years is organizations not taking into account the number of resources that they have, or that culture change. So they're writing processes that are either too complex or too simple for an organization. And what I mean by too simple is, if they read the model and it says you're going to elicit your requirements from the customer, and they'll write a process that says elicit requirements from the stakeholder. They don't understand that you have to write the context in there of, well, how are we as an organization going to do that? How are we going to document it? Who's going to be involved? How's it going to be approved? And where's it going to be stored? So they don't think to look at all of the elements of the model. So they either write them too complex or too simple. So one of the lessons learned is that it really is very important to understand the organization's capacity and make sure that you're writing processes that can realistically be followed and accomplished within the organization. Have those structures in place so that you're not setting yourself up for failure. One of the other lessons learned, and I think one that's very important, is that, you know, significant time can be wasted creating processes because resources don't understand what the intent of the model is or what the requirements of the model are. And this kind of goes back a little bit to not assigning resources that really have that insight or have that level of authority to say, here's how we as an organization are going to operate. So often, again, they'll take the model and they'll just start writing process that only repeats what the model's saying and not actually meeting the intent of it. They don't understand why the model's asking for it. So in some cases, they feel like they're duplicating things. So they're in their processes, they're leaving them out. So I always recommend that clients engage an expert. You know, even if they're not going to use them full time to help implement, get somebody who at least understands the model. Taking those courses that are, what I think 3 days now at this point, or maybe 4 days, is not enough to learn what really that model is, what the expectation and again, what the intention is. It's only enough to read the words that are on the paper without really having that complex understanding of it. So a lot of time and money can be wasted just by not having that understanding. So there are 3 big ones. I'm sure Dan and David have plenty more. And then we can go on and on with that answer.
Of course. And if I may I add on to what Patricia and David said?
Please do.
So what I have found, organizations, whether they're small or large, and many times small, because they are wanting to bid on an RFP and they want this rating. Organizations who are looking just to obtain a rating are setting themselves up for failure, because once the appraisal is over, they're going to go back, as Patricia or David had said, they're going to go back and perform the processes as they had implemented. It's kind of their hair is on fire, and they never get to the end result. They have probably missed milestones, over budget, and introduce defects in the quality of their product or services is minimal at best. For organizations to truly be successful, as Patricia said, it needs to come from leadership. And leadership should want process improvement for the sake of process improvement, not for the sake of obtaining that certification, if you will. And David had mentioned gap analysis, and absolutely, that's where an organization should start, with the gap analysis. And whether it's a gap analysis for level 2 or level 3 is irrelevant, as long as they know the end results. Which level do they want to obtain? So let's say that they want level 2. Perform a gap analysis. Once you have the gap analysis identified and you have individuals working to mitigate those gaps, then you would perform an evaluation appraisal. An evaluation appraisal is everything similar to the benchmark appraisal, but it does not result in a maturity rating. This will allow the organization to, again, close any identified gaps and then move into that benchmark appraisal. And once they have completed those steps, I have found that most, probably 95% of the organizations that I've worked with will always achieve their business goal of level 2 or level 3.
Great insight. Thank you so much. Another question for you, Dan. For companies who are renewing their accreditation, what is your best advice?
Yes, so renewal, as I mentioned, the benchmark appraisal is the only appraisal type that results in a rating. So the renewal can happen every 24 months, and the organization should start well in advance of that 24 months for the renewal to make sure that they have engaged someone to help them collect the evidence, map it to the model. It's not necessary, but it is a best practice for appraisals to map your processes and your artifacts to the model itself. So the renewal, the certification can happen every 24 months, and an organization can go through that process 3 times before they're required to go back through a full benchmark appraisal.
Okay.
Can I expand on it? So Dan
Please.
brings up a great point, and I think it's kind of an overall theme that I've seen over the 25 years that I've been doing this. Organizations don't seem to understand the time that it takes, and Dan is absolutely right. Sometimes they think about the appraisal or the reappraisal 6 months before it's due, and they haven't touched their processes in since their previous appraisal, and they think, well, I'll just be able to pick it up and I'll just be able to pass again, without realizing the time and the effort that goes into this engagement, as well as the time and effort it takes to actually get employees to change their behavior. And that always seems to be one of the longest, or one of the risk that gets introduced into it, which impacts the costs and the timeline. Writing the processes and documenting them is kind of the easy part, but getting people to follow them is the difficult part, where customers can often lose time.
And I would like to add, please, so part of the appraisal process is not just artifact reviews.
Right.
During the appraisal process, we have to have affirmations from the people who are performing the day-to-day work. They have to be able to talk to those templates, the process. So it's not just artifacts in place that are not looked or utilized throughout the year or the 24 months, but we have to have affirmations from the people who are performing the work that indeed, yes, I know what a configuration management plan is. I update it accordingly. I perform configuration audits. Or for my requirements, I have them traceable to the various other components within the process. So we need affirmations from the practitioner as well as the artifacts.
And I'll I'll piggyback on what Patricia and Dan were both talking about as far as the preparation for the appraisals. My philosophy, whether it's CMMI or any of the other standards like ISO 9000 or cybersecurity, what have you, if you make it part of the fabric of the organization and you walk the walk and talk the talk on a daily basis, an appraiser or an auditor or an assessor should be able to come to your desk on Tuesday and say, what do your processes look like? Show me some evidence of the last time that you had to do X, Y, Z. And nobody should be flustered over it. But time and time again, I know myself, Dan, and Patricia have engaged with companies that the hair on fire analogy is perfect, because the bad habits have slipped back into place. And it almost feels like, rather than a presentation of how we do business on a day-to-day basis, it turns into a dog and pony show of this is what we cobbled together over the last 3 months in order to say, look how good we are. Please give us our certification. And that's, I, as a consultant, never want my companies that I work with to have the tail wag the dog, where the framework or the regulation or the standard is forcing them to do something that they don't normally do on a day-to-day basis anyway.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much for your insight. Really appreciate this time that you've spent with us, and wanted to know if, let's kind of put it to the audience, is there any questions that you guys have for our panelists? All right, I see one question. I wanted to get an idea of what are the distinguishing differences between, we've been talking about CMMI, this is the CMMI webinar, but distinguishing differences between CMMI, ISO, and CMMC in their procedures, in the types of procedures and processes.
So I am a CMMC practitioner as well. I'm a registered practitioner advanced, and I've been consulting in the CMMC space. I'm also a lead auditor in the ISO 9000 quality management and ISO 27000 for cybersecurity. So I deal with this type of conversation, and I'm sure Dan and Patricia have their cross references to other standards as well. CMMI and ISO 9000 have a fairly good relationship because they're both focused on quality management. ISO 9000 has a bit of a more of a 60,000 foot view where it says, here's some best practices, go do them. And it's more up to you as an organization to determine what fits for you. ISO 9000 also comes from more of a manufacturing background in its longer history. But the two of them have a lot of common core concepts that fit very well together. So organizations that have ISO 9000 certification will often have a very good groundwork and a footing to make that transition to CMMI as well. CMMC is cybersecurity focused. So that is more about protecting information about the products and services that you provide that would be specific to a DoD contract. The analogy there to another standard would be the NIST 800-171 standard for cybersecurity, or in the ISO world, it would be ISO 27000 for information systems management security.
Okay, thank you very much for that comparison. We have time for one more question. How do you effectively measure the effectiveness, or how do you measure the effectiveness of a CMMI implementation? Any insight on that?
I'm going to go back to the, sorry, Patricia.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Yes. So I'm going to go back to the first few items that we discussed at the very beginning. So how do you determine your effectiveness? Time to market, milestones, cost, number of defects. You should be measuring those before you implement CMMI, and after you implement CMMI, then measure those 4 or 5 objectives. Patricia, what were you going to say?
I was going to say something very similar, Dan, that you have to collect metrics. You don't know how far you've gone if you don't know where you're starting. And there's a great quote, it's either in the CMM or CMMI version 1.1 or something, that talks about metrics. And if you don't know where you're going, anywhere that you end up is okay. And I'm misquoting it, but it's the sentiment is the same. You have to be able to measure where you are before and after the implementation to see that you're growing. And if you are not, or that you're improving rather, and if you're not, then you need to take a look at why. Are our processes not right? Or do we need to modify them? Are we not collecting the right metrics? But you have to have something on paper, some kind of number that you can actually, that will qualify whether or not you've done that improvement.
All right. Well, thank you again very much to each of you. I think this was a really educational and thought-provoking discussion on CMMI. And we are going to kind of just, there aren't any other questions. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen again. And just wanted to share a little bit about, I hope everybody can see my screen, about Alluvionic. We are a project solutions company. We are a CMMI Institute partner, and of course, ISO 9001 2015 certified, and a Cyber AB registered practitioner organization. and our service lines when my mouse here works. We have our service lines that include the buckets of project management and cybersecurity, product development, government services, training, and of course, process improvement. Again, this concludes this webinar. Thank you so much for all of your insight and have a great day. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you so much for having me.